G'day there guys, it's your Aussie Hubby Markee, back at it again with another r/revenge video. Now with that said, I want you to sit back, relax, chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some bloody good revenge. Our first post today is by user Mr010, titled, "Fire me before I quit, I ruin your life." Since I'm still in school, I took a job at a bakery of types which I won't name. The place has bread in the name but also sells overpriced salads and sandwiches. I worked there for close to a year, where I had this boss named Betty. Not her real name, of course. Betty and I didn't get along whatsoever. She had gotten the previous general manager to quit because she had an affair with him and threatened to tell his wife if he didn't leave. He quickly left the job and she was promoted to the position. I didn't like her, but I have to respect the dedication to be the general manager of a small-ass store. When I first started working there, I was respectful, but she would do things that would get on my nerves. For instance, I would clean all the places I would be hired to do, and once I was done and relaxed for maybe 5 minutes, she would run out of the manager's office screeching, "Why aren't you working?" I would tell her, of course, I did my job, and as a cashier, if nobody is there to help, then I didn't have anything to do. She would glare at me, then I would see her accidentally drop an entire pot of brewed coffee onto my freshly mopped floor for me to clean. So I learned quickly to always look busy. Once she realized that I wasn't going to kneel and kiss the ground she walked on, she started dropping my hours. The store ran on a Game of Thrones type politics for who got promotions and raises. Somehow all her friends were managers and would bully the rest of us. She barely was at work. She would drive to my job clock just in case corporate decided to check her hours. So she was essentially stealing hours. When you clocked in, it printed out a small piece of paper telling when you clocked in. She would just drop them on the floor for me to clean up. I usually would pick them up and stick them in a pocket. So this led me to finding petty clock in and out stubs in my pocket at my house. This will be important for later. Did I mention that she was super racist? She was white and most of the staff were my fellow high school peers, who were all mostly people of color. One day at work, she walked out and told us, "When you're on the clock, I own you." When we all reacted to look at her, she backpedaled and was like, "Oh, I didn't mean it like that." This will be important for later. So after a while, I got sick of practically begging for hours, so I went to my current job, but decided I merely wanted to drop my hours, which were already barely a day a week. But suddenly when I got my new job, she scheduled me every single day of an entire week. She never did that even when we were on semi-good terms. So I obviously told her I had a new job and couldn't do this. After that, I went home and called my friend, who was still working there, to tell him I was going to quit tomorrow. He has a bad habit of putting his phone on speaker when he's cleaning at work, so Betty overheard this, obviously. The next day I walk in and go through the respectful motions of saying, "Thank you for the opportunity," and blah blah blah. Betty let me through the entire speech before she said, "Oh yeah, I was meaning to tell you, you're fired." I was so blindsided and ticked, I cussed her out. My mum raised me to treat women with respect, but this fudging fat overweight hippo-looking tramp ticked me the hell off. She's the type of girl to think binge eating was a personality trait. Calm down, OP. So I left and was mad about being fired before I could quit, but didn't push the issue. I'm only 18 and I already had another job. I wasn't expecting Betty to give me a good reference anyway. I would have completely left it alone if it wasn't for the district manager Ben, not real name, texting me. The revenge. He thought I was still working there, so I explained to him I was fired. He was stunned due to the fact I was a decent employee. He asked why she let me go, and I explained it to him and he was angry. He clarified that she fired me before I quit, and I said yes. He was ticked that she did this, and asked if there was anything else she might have done. I kind of just vented to him for a bit. When I told him about the racist remark, he asked if anyone else would collaborate with me. I forgot to mention that she slowly fired and forced people to quit and replaced them with her friends and family, which according to company policy, she couldn't do. Something about conflict of interest. Yeah, you don't say. I asked all the people who were working that day if they could, and a few said they would say they did, but one did even better. My one co-worker Andy is convinced he's the next big vlogger, so he always has his phone out or just using audio recording for hours for a chance to catch a funny clip. I've watched his content, and let me just say, it's super cringe. But turns out he labels each recording by the day and times. So when he checked, he found her making racist remarks. I got a brilliant idea, and with my other fired or co-workers forced to quit, we decided to scour Andy's recordings. We found some great moments of Betty saying controversial things or just being nasty. Like once a guest sneezed on the baked pastries, and when a co-worker told her, she laughed it off and said nobody would know. But this wasn't enough for me. I try to avoid conflict, but when I'm in a situation, I'll follow it through. I looked her up on Facebook and found out she was married. Nobody knew this, so when she had the affair with the other manager and basically blackmailed him, she was also married and cheating. I don't think anyone ever cared enough to find out because she was a nasty old lady. So I found the old manager's Facebook and found out he and his wife were separated. Turns out even after he quit, Betty was still trying to blackmail money out of him. When he didn't, she told his wife anyway, causing his wife to divorce him and basically leave him to go back to live with his parents. I did some research, and in my state, blackmail or extortion is a third-degree penalty, which has a max of 7 years in prison with a fine over $10,000 to the victim. So, I told the old manager what my plan was for her. He agreed to call the cops on her, but I asked if he'd wait until I'd finished my part first. He said he would give me a week. So I met with the district manager Ben and showed him all our evidence. The recordings and the written statements from the other ex-co-workers and people who were still working there. I also gave Ben the slips of paper when Betty clocked in, and then left and returned 8 to 10 hours later to clock out. Ben thanked me for the information, and then I left. A few days later, while walking past the store, I noticed it was closed in the middle of the day. I texted a guy who still worked there, and he told me everything. Turns out Ben first checked the security cameras to see if she was there for the full time she claimed to be. Big surprise, she wasn't. So Ben decided to investigate the store's expenses, since if she's lying about her time, what else could she be stealing? He found out she was stealing money from the store. The guy didn't fully explain how she was, but just that she was. Turns out she was breaking a lot of health and safety codes and used the money for repairs and etc. for herself. So she was fired immediately along with all of her minions, and that left barely anybody to run the store. They shut down to clean up the store and fix things she didn't make. So she's out of a job, and Mark told her husband with photo proof, granny nudes, I know, ew, that she cheated on him. But Mark phrased it so it seemed like she still was. So Betty's husband flips out and decides to divorce her, and Betty is the type to post everything on Facebook. So she's begging someone to let her stay, but all of her friends and family totally bailed on her. So she was living in her car looking for a job. That's when Mark decides to sue her for extortion. So she scrambles to find a lawyer, and to make it even worse, the company decided to sue her for all the money she stole, and plus all the repairs and lost revenue while the store is closed. Betty's life is crap. She had to sell her car for drastically under what it's worth to pay for all the legal trouble. Mark told me bits and pieces of her crying in the courtroom, but not too much. I was never super close with him. Last I heard of Betty is she was living with her sister who definitely hates her. To think she would have just avoided all this if she just let me quit. Edit, I'd just like to answer a few questions most people have had about the validity of the story. First off, I didn't have a good relationship with Betty, so there would be no reason I would even look her up online. Besides, I don't even have Facebook, so I had to actually look her name up to find it. Next is my friend accidentally recording her racist remarks. Don't most of you know that one friend who is sure they're going to be famous or is obsessed with their online image? He's like that, and it gets annoying when he thinks every moment is a photo opportunity. Next is the timeline. Not all of this occurred as quickly as I stated. I had to cut some parts out for the sake of the story. You wouldn't want to read basically a filler arc in a Reddit story, right? I'm guessing Panera Bread was the store? If so, this story is definitely believable. I've known many people that have worked at Panera and the experience is terrible. Panera is losing nearly 100% of its workers every year as fast food turnover crisis worsens. Crisis or fate coming home. You can't treat workers like they do and not expect a crisis. The chickens are coming home to roost for them, and worst thing is, they will get bailed out just like every other big company. The CEO has asked the employees to write/call to their congresspeople to ask for a bailout for the company. Not for the employees, for the billionaire owners. They've been in a freefall of upper management incompetence since the founders sold the company to a holding company built on Nazi slave labor. I did not see this coming. Stop. Our next post is by Grape Ice Cream Float, titled, "Faked proof that I had a flat tire so that the lazy people in my group project would have to do the presentation themselves, therefore likely will fail." I'm in a class where a group research project/presentation is a huge chunk of overall points. Everyone knows in group projects that you always have that one slacker who doesn't do anything that you have to compensate for. However, I got stuck with possibly the worst 3 people to be in a project with in the class. I did the entire research, presentation, poster boards, etc., among many other annoying things myself. I tried talking to them and telling them they needed to put in their share of efforts. Ignored. I'd send them tasks to do. Ignored. I'd try to schedule meetings. They'd say they were coming and then leave me alone at the library. This happened from the get-go. It was abundantly clear that they expected everyone else to do the work, but everyone else turned out to just be me. Rule: we couldn't have things 100% memorized word for word, and we couldn't read off of anything. We had to actually know the subject. I was fully prepared to do most of the talking, and even wrote down a small script for them, and told them to know what to say during their part, at the very least. The night before I told them we had to meet or at least go over the whole thing one time. Once again, none of them showed. At this point I'm livid, and decide they can just do it themselves, which means they'd get up there, not know a damn thing to say other than the small info I gave them, and they couldn't even bullcrap anything because they did no research. Thing is, if we miss without an excuse, we fail the project. If you have an excuse, you have to have documentation. I commute and live an hour away, so I decide that I'll conveniently have a flat tire right before class. Went out and actually bought a tire so I could have the receipt to prove it. Emailed the professor, who said I can present by myself during his office hours. Turns out they completely bombed, and not only probably failed the project, but since they're bad students, might even make them fail the class. Edited to say, the professor stated at the beginning that we were not allowed to contact him about people slacking in the group, and said to work it out amongst ourselves. Said that we were adults and that he wouldn't even respond to emails about it. Had the exact opposite happen to me once. I was in a group with 2 girls and a guy. The project was done over the entire semester and presented in parts. The breakdown is, we pick a country and explore birth, death, and migration rates, as well as the country's economic status and how this affects said rates. The chicks and I did our parts to the best of our ability. The dude pulled no-show moves at every turn. Didn't have a sitter, didn't have a ride, etc. So we went on without him. And we let the professor know that he had contributed nothing and we wouldn't be putting his name on our work. The professor made the guy be his own group and he had to do about 35 pages worth of work on his own, presented over 4 parts. It was satisfying. Did this exact same thing in college. 2 of us did the work, 2 others decided not to participate every step of the way. Day of the presentation comes, the 2 slackers got up to present with us, and the professor told them to sit down. I had emailed to her 2 days before the class and forwarded to her all the communication, or lack thereof, between myself and the 2 slackers. She gave them a week to come up with their own presentation. They still bombed, and I wore a huge grin the whole time. Our next post is by Mirabelle, titled, "X found out our baby's name from the local newspaper." A bit of an older story. This happened almost 14 years ago. My now ex-husband worked a 24-hour shift that night, and he didn't come home after his shift had ended. I was very worried. I went to see his workplace, where they said he went home after the end of his shift. His friends knew nothing about him, he didn't answer the phone, I was 9 months pregnant at the time, so you can imagine how upset I was. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, he showed up with a hangover and said he didn't want to be a father anymore. I was shocked. What do you mean? He doesn't want to be a father anymore. We already had a 3-year-old daughter by that moment who was a genuine daddy's little girl. He said he needed time to figure things out for himself and that he doesn't love me anymore. I literally collapsed. I called my mother crying, packed 2 suitcases, one for myself and the other for my daughter, and the ex took me to my mother's place. I had time to pull myself together by then, and as he wished, we agreed to take a half-year break. That he still be there for me and the kids. Wrong! A week later, he asked me for a divorce. I did not give it to him. I told him, our children are not guilty of anything, and the smaller one has the right to be born from a legal marriage. 2 weeks after the breakup, I found out he was cheating on me with another woman who also had a husband and a little son. 2 families got broken up at the same time. 3 weeks after the breakup, I gave birth to our second daughter. And she looked just like him. My eyes, but everything else was like him. I cried, because I knew she will never be able to grow up with her dad. I called him and told that the baby was born and I need him to come with me so we can name our baby and get a birth certificate for her. He said no, he's busy being out with his friends partying for a week. I hated him at this point, so I called the local government and asked if I was legally married and wanted to name the child. Would my husband have to be there with me? I was told no, just take the marriage certificate with you and that's enough. Of course, you can't do that nowadays, but then you could. And anyone who wants to comment that the baby wasn't his, both our girls are his. I never cheated on him, cheating goes against everything I believe in. The day after I got out of the hospital, I went to name my daughter, but I didn't mention it to him. 3 weeks later, he called me and shouted at me why did he have to read about our child's name in a local newspaper. In our country, the names and dates of births of new babies in smaller towns are put in a local newspaper. I answered him calmly, you didn't have time to come with me. Your friends were more important, so you didn't deserve to know. Before the breakup, he insisted that we only give 1 first name. Our first daughter has 2. Since he didn't come with me to name her, I put 2 first names. He should have come along. His mistake. She was 6 months old when he first saw her, because he did not bother to visit her. Before the divorce, I put alimony on him through court. We signed the divorce papers 6 months later, and it was 4 days after our 4th wedding anniversary. But on our anniversary, I called him and said, "Happy anniversary, a-hole." And a year late, on the 1st of April, I called him again and said that there was a mix-up with the divorce papers. We're still married. He freaked out. He said he didn't want to have a wife and kids and blah blah blah. I told him that, too bad, you have 2 kids till the day you die, but you don't have a wife. April Fools, you idiot. And hung up the phone. It felt great. Edit. Wow. Did not expect this post to go down like this. Have to make something clear. I was 21 at the time, so I was young. Give me a break. What I left out of the earlier was that, just before we split, I always wanted to give 2 first names from the beginning. Our older daughter has 2 names too. He wanted to have 1, and since he made a clear sign that he didn't want to come to the naming, I made my choice. And why was I in a hurry? Because I had no money. I needed to name the child and get a birth certificate so I could apply for the child benefits from the state. Every child gets them when they are born till they are 18 months old. So I could buy food and diapers and all the necessary things. I didn't even have a stroller. A month before the breakup, I gave him $7,000 for a car purchase and a GIL house repair, which the local authority had given me as a pregnancy support for the baby. The usual process in our country by the government. He promised to pay me back in a year, but he didn't. So that's why I made the April Fool's joke. It wasn't my money, the money was meant for the baby. Someone mentioned that he would never get peace from me because I was still bullying him. No, I won't. That's a 1st of April joke that was the only one and the last one I ever made to him. After that, our communication is civilized. I'll let him know if the girls want to invite him to a school event or if they want to visit him, or if there's any need for this data, signature to the school, or any other legitimate paperwork. There's quite a bit more, but I'm going to cut it off there and just go to some comments. Did you have 0 red flags before that shift when he ghosted? Was he totally normal? I'm glad you and your girls are good. I mean, we did have our problems, but nothing that major. We were living with grandmother and grandfather-in-law at the time, so when we disagreed on something, we couldn't yell it out. It was very civil, didn't want to upset anyone. Everybody said that we had the perfect marriage. Even grandmother-in-law were in shock when we separated, and ex got a mouthful from grandfather-in-law. Our next post is by Ned Rag B, titled, "A lady almost hit the front of my car trying to pull into a parking spot I was turning into, so I just sat there." So I'm at Costco, in need of dog food, and it's ridiculously busy for a Monday. Barely any parking spots until I spot one at the end of my lot. I make my way down the aisle and am about to turn into the parking spot when a lady runs over the curb and almost hits me to take the spot. Thankfully, I tapped my brakes in time or she would have taken off my bumper. I look up and she is shaking her head and wagging her finger in a no motion at me. What the hell? I was like, okay, I'll just wait for her to back up since I'm obviously turning into the spot. She doesn't. My girlfriend is with me and was ticked that the lady wasn't budging. I gave her my Costco card and just sat in the aisle in a face-off with this lady. She goes inside, gets the dog food, comes back out, and loads up the car. She then pushes the cart into the spot we were waiting for and hops into the car. The look on the woman's face was enough to give me satisfaction for a week. She had to get out and move the cart so she could park once I reversed through the entire aisle. Worth it. Our next post is by user ASDF_27, titled, "I put a fake note on a Corvette's windshield that read, 'Sorry I hit your car, you probably won't even notice the damage,' because it was taking up 4 spots." So, title is fairly self-explanatory, but I'll elaborate. I was trying to find a parking spot at my university. The lot was notoriously crowded, but my campus didn't have a lot of options. While searching, I saw a Corvette taking up 4 prime spots near the front of the lot. After about 10 minutes of waiting/looking for a spot, one opened up towards the back of the lot. Furious at the nerve of the driver being so inconsiderate, I wrote a note saying, "Sorry I hit your car, you probably won't even notice the damage," and left it on their windshield. When I got out of class and was headed back to my car, I saw a very stereotypical college-aged Corvette owner frantically searching the vehicle while yelling into their phone. I don't know who they were talking to, but I feel bad for them having to deal with this person. So my auntie is kind of a ditz and sometimes takes up 2 parking spots because she doesn't pay close attention to the lines. A while ago, she was really confused by a note someone left on her car. It said, "This is not a Ferrari." It was pretty hard for me to choke back a laugh when she told me about it. Oh my god, that's a hard diss. Those are the worst. At least with expensive vehicles, you can understand the motive, but when a crapbox Honda Civic takes up multiple spots, it's baffling. Like when I get stuck behind a muscle car going 5 under the speed limit, all I can think of is, you should have bought a Nissan Versa. Our last post for the day is by user Waffle Raven, titled, "Buried and Gone." I was about 9 or 10 in primary school. There was one kid who was the bane of everyone's existence. Let's call him Jake. Jake was a little crap. He was spoiled rotten and delighted in seeing others miserable. One time when a friend of mine was climbing a tree, he threw a half brick at him and knocked him off. Never got in trouble for this because no adult saw it. Long story short, he's a crap. On one Friday, he was being particularly crappy. Basically pulling hair, telling me I'm a sissy for reading books, telling others that they were worthless, and generally being a little crap. So while he was running around causing mischief, I quietly put down my book and went to the storage room. We kept shoes there. Honestly, can't remember why, I think to stop the floors getting scuffed up, but can't tell. And found his brand new super pricey stylish shoes. I took one of them, just one, and took it out to the yard. I dug a hole as deep as I could in the sandpit and dumped the shoe in. After burying it, I went back to my book. When my mother picked me up, Jake was frantically looking for his shoe. His own mother hot on his heels, berating him for losing something so expensive. I left. As far as I know, they never found it. Also, P.S. I saw all your comments and I see that you were upset on the Am I the Arsehole video. I will definitely start reading more comments on videos. It's just in legal advice, I sometimes do like 10 minutes of comments on one post. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it did affect me seeing you guys upset so much about the Am I the Arsehole comments. So, you know, if there is good comments on posts like Pro Revenge 2, like just now, I will read some more of them. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of r/revenge today. Tell me what you thought of all this down in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts, opinions, whatever you've been up to today. This has been Markee. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.